the main reasons that people don't get what they want is because they don't actually figure out what it is. And the probability that you're going to get what would be good for you, let's say, which would even be better than what you want, right? Because, you might be wrong about what you want, easily. But maybe you could get what would really be good for you. Well, why don't you? Well, because you don't try. You don't think, okay, here's what I would like if I could have it. And I don't mean in a way that you manipulate the world to force it to deliver you goods for status or something like that. That isn't what I mean. I mean something like, imagine that you were taking care of yourself like you were someone you actually cared for. And then you thought, okay, I'm caring for this person. I would like things to go as well for them as possible. What would their life have to be like in order for that to be the case? Well, people don't do that. They don't sit down and think, all right, let's figure it out. You've got a life. It's hard, obviously. It's like 3 years from now, you can have what you need. You got to be careful about it. You can't have everything. You can have what would be good for you, but you have to figure out what it is, and then you have to aim at it. Well, my experience with people has been if they figure out what it is that would be good for them, and then they aim at it, then they get it. And it's strange because it's a strange thing. It's not quite that simple because, you may formulate an idea about what would be good for you, and then you take 10 steps towards that, and you find out that your formulation was a bit off, and so you have to reformulate your goal. So you're kind of going like this as you move towards the goal. But a huge part of the reason that people fail is because they don't ever set up the criteria for success. And so, since success is a very narrow line and very unlikely, the probability that you're going to stumble on it randomly is 0. And so there's a proposition here, and the proposition is, if you actually want something, you can have it. Now the question then would be, well, what do you mean by actually want? And the answer is that you reorient your life in every possible way to make the probability that will occur as certain as possible. And that's a sacrificial idea, right? It's like, you don't get everything. Obviously. But maybe you can have what you need. And maybe all you have to do to get it is ask. But the asking isn't a whim or today's wish. It's like, you have to be deadly serious about it. You have to think, okay, like, I'm taking stock of myself. And if I was going to live properly in the world, and I was going to set myself up such that being would justify itself in my estimation, and I don't mean as a harsh judge, exactly what is it that I would aim at?
People say this courage, they talk to me about my courage fairly frequently, and that's not right exactly. I just learned to be afraid of the right thing. And I really mean that. I mean, I saw an endless repetition in my clinical practice and in my own private life, when my eyes were open, the consequences of not saying what was true. It's like whatever hell you might fall into by opening your mouth when you have something to say that isn't popular, it's nothing like the hell that you're going to envelop yourself in if you lose control of your own tongue and mind. And like I said, in my clinical practice, I never saw anyone get away with anything even once. And so all you have in a situation like that is what is the truth. Now, of course, you only have your approximations to the truth, but that's better than nothing. And so you need to be afraid of the right thing, and you should be afraid of contaminating your soul with deceit. That's what you should be afraid of. That will definitely do you in. And I know exactly how. What happens is, garbage in, garbage out, the old programmer saying goes. And so you'll fill your head with nonsense and no one will call you on it except you. But you can still that voice if you try hard enough. You just wait until you get in real trouble. One day there'll come a point where you have to make a decision. And the decision is the difference between life and death, or worse, between someone else's life and death, or worse, between health and the suffering that's worse than death. And because you've compromised yourself to such a degree, you will not be able to rely on your judgment, and you will make the mistake you shouldn't make. And then you're done. And that will absolutely happen. So you tell mistruths voluntarily at your exceptional peril. and you avoid the unpleasant truths that you might have to delve into in all their messiness at your absolute peril and the peril of everyone around you. And so if you see that, you become afraid of that. That's hell. And hell is worse than death. So, and I mean that most sincerely. No, the existential psychotherapist in the 50s, taking a page from Heidegger, talked about thrownness, right? The arbitrary nature of our existence. I mean, here you are, you have the ethnicity and race that was bestowed upon you. You had no choice in that. You're the victim and the beneficiary of this particular historical moment. You're the victim and beneficiary of all the atrocity and the wonders of the past. You deal with your own emotions. You deal with the fact of this specific time and place, all of that. And there is a sense of, there's a sense of mortality, certainly, that's associated with that, with finitude and mortality. And you can easily say, in some sense, that we're all victimized deeply by our own susceptibility to vulnerability and tragedy. And I think that's true. But then the question is, well, what's the best way of dealing with that? And falling prey to it. When my daughter was young, she was very ill. And one of the things we told her repeatedly, and which I think she did very well to her credit, was often she was too ill really to be able to go to school because she couldn't wake up in the morning and she was in pain. But she needed to go to school. And one of the things we told her was, don't use your illness as an excuse. Right? Because you're already in trouble, kid. You got your problems and they're serious. But if you can hold on to the distinction between the part of you that can, in spite of this, and the part that can't because of it, and not blur that distinction, then that's one more thing you have on your side while you're attempting to struggle through this. And to her credit, she managed that, and quite pristinely, and that was extraordinarily helpful. It was very difficult at times. After she had had her hip replaced, she couldn't get around that well. And so we decided to put her in a motorcycle course, which was rather a terrifying thing to do since she just had a hip replacement, but she needed to have a scooter to get around. And so she went with her mother to this motorcycle course, and they were driving motorcycles, not scooters. And at one point, one of the people who was being trained wiped out on the motorcycle, and it was rather traumatic, let's say. And she woke up the next day and was too afraid to go to the course. And so we said, well, it's understandable. Why don't you just get in the car and go to the course and see when you get there if you can manage it? And she got herself out of bed and went and managed it, and then she passed the course, and then she had a scooter and could zoom around the city for the next couple of years. And so that was really good. But it was very hard to draw that line, right? Because in some sense, she'd been victimized by this arbitrary illness. And, you tend as a parent to have an outpouring of empathy, the empathy that can destroy under those circumstances, because you coddle the person more than is absolutely necessary, right? And you have every reason to, because they're suffering like mad. But you want to be a victim and be a tragic figure? And you might say yes, but you wouldn't if you thought it through. So, and then if someone asked me that question, say, in a clinical setting, I would do a little analysis of it. It's like, okay, well, you're suffering from this traumatic experience. You want to get over it. We'd have to figure out what the practical steps might be, and that might be finding somebody to talk to, or there's other ways of dealing with it. But you delve into the practical realm to sort of address that.
Sit on your bed one day and ask yourself, what remarkably stupid things am I doing on a regular basis to absolutely screw up my life? And if you actually ask that question, but you have to want to know the answer, right? Because that's actually what asking the question means. It doesn't mean just mouthing the words. It means you have to decide that you want to know. You'll figure that's out so fast it'll make your hair curl. It's as if Jung thought about this. He thought that people had two poles of consciousness, and one was the individual consciousness that we each identify with, and the other was something he called the self, and the self is you might think about it as the divine within. That's close enough approximation. It's the universal part of your consciousness. It's your conscience. That's another way of thinking about it. Whatever your conscience is. But it's something that you can consult. It's like the Socratic daemon. Socrates said, that the thing that made him different than everyone else in Greece was that he consulted his daemon, his genius. He asked himself how it was that he should conduct himself in the world, and then he did that, whatever it was. He didn't try to force a solution, he didn't try to force a solution selfishly. He asked, I'm going to manifest myself in the best possible manner in the world. I would like to do that. What would that be? Well, you're perfectly capable of thinking. God only knows how. You're perfectly capable of immense feats of imagination and dream and fantasies. God only knows how you do all of that. What would happen if you consulted yourself about the best possible outcome for you? You might get an answer. If you concentrate solely on your career, you can get a long way in your career. And I would say that that's a strategy that a minority of men preferentially do. That's all they do. They work like 70, 80 hours a week. They go flat out on their career. They're staking everything on the small probability of exceptional status in a narrow domain. But it's hard on them. They don't have a life. It's very difficult for them to have a family. They don't know how to take any leisure activity. Like, they get very one-dimensional. Now, it may be that unidimensionality is the price you have to pay to be exceptional at one thing, right? Because if you're going to be something like a genius level mathematician and you want to do that or a scientist, say, it's like you're in your lab all the time, you're working 70 hours a week or 80 hours a week, you're smart, you're dedicated, you're unidimensional, and that's how you get to beat all the other people who are doing that. It's the only way. But the problem is you don't get a life. Now, if you love being a scientist and you have that kind of focus of mind, well, first of all, you're a rare person, and second, you're going to pay for it. But fine, more power to you. But it's a risky business to do that. You sacrifice a lot for it. And I would say most often, if you're speaking about having a healthy life, that isn't what you do. You spread yourself out more. So, you have a family, you have some things that you do outside of work that are meaningful to you and useful. You have a network of friends. Those 3 things alone, or 4 things alone, are plenty to keep you well oriented. And then if one of those things collapses, everything doesn't go. Now, the price you pay for that is the more you strive to optimize that balance, the less likely you are to be fantastically successful at any single one of them. But you might have a very, if you consider your life as a whole, that might be a winning strategy. One of the things Carl Jung said, I really liked this. He thought that men went after perfection and women went after wholeness. So they're different value. They're different. There's something different at the top of the value hierarchy. So perfection would be stake it all on one thing and look for radical success. Not that all men do that, because they don't, but we're talking about extremes, at least with regards to the men that do that. The wholeness idea is more like, well, I want one thing in my life to be 150%, or I want 5 things in my life to be 80%. Well, there's a lot more richness in a life where you have 5 things operating at 80%, but you're not operating at any of them at 150%.
I would say what we mean by soul is something like animating spirit. And you might say, well, what's a spirit? And well, that's actually rather easy to answer. So when a child of 4 is playing house, let's say when a child of 4 is playing house, she acts out the role of the mother. But acting out, that's a strange thing, right? Because she doesn't literally duplicate in her actions or her perceptions in the game what she observed her mother literally doing. So for example, she didn't go into her mother's bedroom when her mother awoke and watched her turn her head in a particular way to awaken and count the number of blinks so that she could mimic that in her play. And you think that's absurd, but it's not absurd if it's just mimicry. It's not. It's unbelievably sophisticated. So what the girl does is she watches her mother manifest maternal behavior across a vast array of instances, and she integrates that with the image of the mother she's received from all the books she's been read and all the little movies she's watched, the Disney movies and so forth, and she abstracts out the animating principle of the maternal, and then she embodies that in play, and usually with a little boy, and that's practice for what's going to come later. It's unbelievably sophisticated. And she's embodying a spirit, and the spirit there is the abstraction of the central animating principle from multiple embodiments of its manifestation. And if you think children can't do that, well, then you don't know anything about children, because they do that all the time in their pretend play, which is a necessary precursor to healthy psychological development. And so part of what we refer to as the soul is the presence of that spirit, or maybe even the capacity of embodying such spirits. And it's very difficult to know how deep that goes. You know, I had a vision at one point of all the men in my life who've been particularly influential in a benevolent way. You know, and you think, well, just the mere notion of the idea that there could be a benevolent way that would unite the acts of benevolence across a series of men, that's all comprehensible to you. You take that as a matter of course when you say that there are such things as good men, and you can identify them, right? Something stable about whatever is good across multiple manifestations of incarnation, let's say. And I saw that transform into the Father person of the Trinity as the embodiment of that benevolent spirit. Now, I don't have any idea what that means metaphysically, because who does? But that spirit manifesting itself within is certainly part of what we refer to when we talk about the soul. And you can see that shine through people. I mean, it's part of what gives someone charisma. It's part of what elicits the instinct to imitate in you. You know, and you see that even in simple things. When you see a remarkable athlete do something incredibly athletic to put the soccer ball, the football ball through the net, to score the goal, and everybody leaps to their feet in celebration of that, well, that's a celebration of the divine capacity to hit the target dead on. And it grips you at such a low level, way down inside your soul, that you're compelled to your feet to cheer, and you don't even know what you're doing. But you enjoy it, that's for sure. And that enjoyment is also a sign of the depth and utility of that response. You see this in all the things that people do that are, you know, so-called popular entertainment. It's unbelievably sophisticated. The soul is participating in that in the fullest extent. And, you know, you can say, well, there's no necessary use for the religious terminology. It's like, well, until you come up with a better word, there's plenty of use for it, because it's a very complex and deep phenomena. And to, you know, just cast it into the realm of superstition in some casual manner it's just not helpful. Not in any possible. It's not helpful scientifically. It's not helpful ethically. It's not helpful existentially. Try treating someone for a while as if they don't have a soul. Just really, I mean it. Just, you know, treat them like a deterministic machine, if that's your belief. Really act it out. You'll be like the most hated person in town in about 15 minutes. Well, I mean, what do you make of practical evidence like that? I mean, you interact with people as if they're free souls capable of choosing between good and evil. That's what you do all the time. And maybe you can addle yourself out of that by some ridiculous rationalist ideology, but that just means you're kind of a gabbling fool, and it's just going to make you trip over things you don't even notice in all of your social interactions. I don't care how you think philosophically or ideologically, you bloody well know that what I just said is true. So, and that's true even when you're interacting with an infant or a small child. It's true when you're dealing with someone who's elderly and virtually incapacitated in every way. You still see that divine spark, for lack of a better term, and we do lack a better term, by the way. You see that everywhere if your eyes are open and if you're willing to see it, and to the degree that you're responsive to that, then your actions are guided by love and your words are guided by truth. If you want people to appreciate having you around, learning how to listen, that is a skill that is absolutely unbeatable. And this technique of summarizing to their satisfaction, that works like a charm. And it's not, you know, you might be a little awkward when you first try it and might feel a little manipulative because you're not that good at it. But if you get expert at it, and you have the greatest conversations with everyone. You know, I had people in my clinical practice who were extraordinarily impaired intellectually and suffering from all sorts of assorted pathologies in addition to that. And if I was listening to them properly, they were as fascinating as anybody I had on the, say, more able and competent end of the spectrum. And you learn so much because there is nothing that people won't tell you if you listen. It is absolutely amazing what people will tell you, and so quickly they'll reveal things they didn't even know about themselves. And they need to know those things often. They've been hidden for years. It's so rewarding. And then this use of attentive reward, that's also, it's fun in a game-like sense once you learn to play it, because you're watching. You think, I'll just wait, this person's going to do something good. Sooner or later, it's like, pat, good work. And people are so thrilled that that little manifestation of goodness in their heart that managed to sneak out past their cynicism and boredom was recognized. They're so, what is it? It restores their faith in what's good inside them. It really does. It's unbelievably powerful. And so that can work if you're embroiled in a difficult relationship, you know, and you can't escape easily, or maybe you can't escape on moral grounds. That listening, that helps a lot. You might have to listen a lot, but that use of judicious reward, man, that's a powerful technique. And this is another thing you can do in your own household. This is so useful, man. If you get good at doing this, your life will get so much better. You can't believe it. Is watch the people around you, and whenever they do anything that you would like to see repeated on a regular basis, tell them exactly what they did in detail, with, you know, be positive about it, obviously, and just indicate that you noticed. And because I saw this when I was grading student essays, you know, and so I taught this seminar for a long time, and I was trying to teach kids how to write. They were in their 4th year of university in the honors psych program. You'd think they'd bloody well already know how to write, but they didn't. And so I'd have them write a 4-page essay on a given topic, and then they had to rewrite that to a 6-page essay, and then they had to rewrite that to an 8-page essay. And the first essay I graded, it was only 5% of their grade, and I told them, I'm going to cut you into ribbons, but it doesn't matter because it's, you know, 5% of your grade, and so they could tolerate that. And generally, by the 3rd essay, they had written the best thing they'd ever written in their life, and they learned so fast it was unbelievable. But one of the things I noticed was that they did a little testing with the first essay. They'd hand in something. It was just like, God, formulaic, boring. They weren't in it at all, you know. There was nothing of the person in there. There was no thought. There was just the kind of psychobabble that they'd learned, especially if they were in faculties of education. And it was dry and dull, and everything about it was wrong. And so those are hard to grade, right? So what's wrong with my essay? Well, the words aren't right. The phrases, they're not so good. They're not organized well into sentences. The sentences aren't sequenced well in the paragraphs. The paragraphs don't make a coherent argument, and the entire thing is empty. But other than that, no problem. It was often easier just to rewrite those essays than to grade them. No, so in any case, though, one of the things I did learn was that even in an essay like that, there is usually like 1 sentence or 2 sentences buried on like page 3 that was an actual thought and reasonably clearly stated and somewhat gripping, you know? It was like the person popped out from all the background rubbish and said, well, what about this? And if you saw that and checked it and said, hey, you hit the mark right there, the next essay would be like 2/3 that. And that was really fun to see. And then maybe by the 3rd essay, maybe it was all like that. And then they were really thrilled. It's like, wow, I wrote this, you know, and it was sort of the culmination. Well, it was a 4th year seminar. It was the culmination of their career as a psychology undergraduate. So that was great fun. But you can do that in your own household. If the envious part of you isn't jealous of the revelation of the goodness of the person. And so here's the opposite tack, if you want to do this. So imagine that you're a man who's managed to attract a mate and he believes he's punched above his weight. So this woman is more attractive, let's say, more vivacious, more desirable than he deserves. So that's going to grate on his soul a fair bit, right? Partly because her shining casts a dim light on his lack of utility, let's say. And so you can imagine someone like that being prone to jealousy for obvious reasons. And so the best tact to manage in a situation like that, if you're that man, is to wait till your wife dresses herself up in a particularly attractive manner and then either fail to notice by occupying yourself with something trivial while she's attempting to gain your attention, or by criticizing her directly for what she's just managed to do. And if you do that 50 times, let's say, you can be sure that she'll never reveal her attractiveness to anyone else for the rest of her life, including you, and you'll get exactly what you deserved. So that's the opposite of watching people carefully. Now, I learned this in part from Skinner, B.F. Skinner, the famous animal behaviorist, because he used all sorts of reinforcement contingencies to shape animal behavior. And Skinner was unbelievably good at this. He trained pigeons in World War II to guide missiles by pecking at photographs. So they could map the photographs onto the missile trajectory, viewing the territory underneath, and peck accurately enough to guide the missile to its destination. That was discontinued as the technology for guided missiles developed, but Skinner could do that. And, you know, we think pigeons, well, they're not that bright. It's like, they're smarter than you think, pigeons. That's why they can live in cities. That's not easy for a bird to pull off, you know. It's not their natural habitat. And so, but Skinner, although he would use punishment, technically speaking, which is the application of a certain amount of pain, or threat, which is the use of anxiety, but what he believed was most effective was reward. But it required a tremendous amount of attention. So, for example, if Skinner was trying to train a rat to climb up a little ladder and then across the ladder and then maybe do a pirouette and come down, which he could do with no problem, he'd just watch the rat, and then when it got close to the ladder, he'd give it a food pellet. Now, his rats were starved, by the way, down to 3/4 of their normal body weight, so they were pretty eager to work for food. It's not something you necessarily saw in the methodology section of the papers, but, and that's not a critique of Skinner, it's just an indication of how simplification takes place in laboratory experiments. But in any case, he'd wait for the rat to get near the ladder and give it a food pellet. And soon the rat would be hanging around the ladder quite a lot. And then now and then, just more or less randomly, the rat would put a paw up on the ladder. Food pellet. Well, then the rat would hang around the bottom of the ladder with paw up. Well, if he did that continually through observation, he could get the rat to do pretty much anything that you could imagine a rat could do, and then maybe some things you couldn't imagine. And this isn't a manipulative technique, by the way, although it can be used that way. It's not effective unless you do it with a certain degree of wisdom. You want to think, well, what do you want in your house? How about peace, tranquility, happiness, and humor? Something like that. It's not a bad first pass approximation. And you got to get that in your head. It's like, do you want that, or do you want the delights of endless martyrdom? Because you have to make a choice, and you might think, I wouldn't pick martyrdom. It's like, really? Really? You wouldn't, eh? You'd pick peace and happiness and humor, and so everywhere you go, that's all you're ever surrounded with. It's like highly improbable. So don't be so sure you're aiming up. But if you can orient yourself in that direction, and carefully, and knowing full well what the hellish alternative is, because you need to know that, then you can watch and see, well, when is this manifesting itself in the people around me? And then you can tell them in detail, I noticed today we're having a discussion at dinner, you know, and you made a spectacularly witty remark right at the right time, and it was provocative but not annoying, and so good work. And then the kid thinks, oh my God, you noticed? And then he's like twice as funny the next day, and maybe not in some unbearable manner. And that really works. It really works. But like I said, you have to quell the envy that would otherwise beset you, and you have to want to aim up, and then you have to not be jealous of the other person's goodness, and you have to be extremely attentive. But man, as a transformation technique, even in extraordinarily difficult relationships, which goes back to your point, there isn't anything I know of that's more effective.
Challenge versus threat, it's not the same, even if the magnitude of the problem is the same. And so putting yourself in a challenging, let's call it mind frame, you can't just do that by magic. Putting yourself in a challenging mind frame is much easier on you psychophysiologically, because you don't go into the generalized stress response to the same degree. And you're activating your exploratory and seeking systems, which are dopaminergically mediated and that involve positive emotion. So if you can face something voluntarily rather than having it chase you, it's way better for you psychophysiologically. So that's partly why, well, it's worthwhile to go find the dragon in its lair instead of waiting for it to come and eat you. So, and especially when you also add the idea that if you go find the dragon in its lair, you might find it when it's a baby instead of a full-fledged bloody monster that is definitely going to take you down. And so that's part of the reason why, well, there's a whole bunch of things that emerge out of that observation, like don't avoid small problems that you know are there. Face them, because they'll grow into big problems all by themselves. And you can think about, imagine the tax department sends you a notification. You owe them like $300. Well, it's that's annoying. Maybe you don't even want to open the letter. Or maybe if you do, you just put it on the shelf. But that damn thing doesn't just sit there like a piece of paper on the shelf, right? You ignore that for 5 or 6 years, it's going to become attached to all sorts of horrible things. And if you ignore it long enough, you get the idea. It's going to turn into something that is completely unlike the little piece of paper that it's written on. And many, many problems in life are like that. You'll see that they pop their ugly little head up, and and you might want to turn away. You might not want to think about it, which is the easiest way of turning away, right? You just don't attend to it. It's not like you repress it or anything like that. You just fail to attend to it. And that's as a long-term strategy, it's dismal. It's also something I think that's more characteristic of people who are high in neuroticism and high in agreeableness, because agreeable people don't like conflict. And people who are high in neuroticism, who are high in negative emotion, are hit harder per unit of uncertainty or threat. And so, and that's partly why in psychotherapy, a lot of times the people you see need assertiveness training, so that would be the opposite of agreeableness, or they need to help get their anxiety and emotional pain under control. Those are not the only reasons. There's antisocial behavior, but you can't fix that in therapy, in all likelihood. There's alcoholism. There's lots of other reasons, but those are two major reasons. I bought this cottage up north in northern Canada, and it's very dark up there. And you can go onto the dock at night, and it's dark enough so you can see the Milky Way, and it has to be pretty dark before you can see the Milky Way. And it's very impressive. You know what that's like if you've been out to see the night sky, or maybe you feel the same way when you see the Grand Canyon, or a remarkable waterfall, or some particularly beautiful scene, or perhaps you feel that way in a cathedral, or more likely you feel that way when you're listening to music that really grips you, right? And it's all the same experience, it's an experience of awe, and it's way down low in your nervous system, like the orienting reflex. It's not a cognitive response precisely. It's a precognitive emotional response that signifies significance. And you look up at the night sky, and it fills you with a sense of awe. But it doesn't just do that. You see, it activates the impulse to imitate, which is a very deep motivation in human beings. We're unbelievable mimics. We mimic each other all the time, which is why we all use the same words, let's say. We're very good at embodying other people's embodiments. It's a particular talent that human beings have, and we're so good at that we imitate all sorts of things that aren't even human. And so then you view this expansive night sky, and a sense of awe fills you as you confront the infinite. And it calls to something inside of you that can master the infinite. And that's a form of imitation, right? To look into the darkest place, the most wide expanse possible, and to have something inside you respond that's capable of dealing with that. That's that instinct to imitate. And that's calling the best out of you, and that's why you love doing that. And it isn't just that you love it, it's that you cannot live without it. You cannot live without it. And I know so many of you, atheists or otherwise, you can't live without music. You think, well, why can you not live without music? What is it calling to precisely? That remarkable interplay of harmonious patterns, because that's what music is, and that's what the world is. It's not objects, it's the harmonious interplay of patterns, and music reflects that, and then you orient yourself
in your embodied manner to those patterns and dance along with the world. And that revivifies you. And if you're particularly good at, well, maybe you'll also attract a mate. And you want a mate that doesn't attempt to dominate you sexually during the introductory dance, right? You want a mate who will play along with you and match your movements to theirs so that you can see that there's a harmonious interplay between the two of you as you meet in play, soul to soul, if you can manage it. And everyone knows that. And that capacity that's called out in the dance is the same capacity that's called out by the night sky, and it's the same thing that's represented in those Byzantine churches. You look deep enough into infinity and you find your destiny. And that destiny is everything you could be. And we all know that and this is what men and women search for in each other. You know, if you're rejected by a woman, well, why is she rejecting you? Well, maybe her judgment is off, and that would be very, what would you say, convenient for you. But she's rejecting you because you are not all that you could be, and maybe not even all that you need to be. And so that's a very painful rejection, and it causes all sorts of tension between men and women. But, you know, women have a lot at stake in this game. And so they're looking for something, what? Powerful, dominating, brutal, terrible? No. Something perhaps capable of that. But even more important, capable of mastering it, right? And capable of singing despite that. We all know that's true, and the shame that men feel when they're rejected by women is precisely the shame that they feel at knowing deep in their heart that they have not lived up to what they are capable of being. And that harsh judgment that women lay on men, which, by the way, is part of our sexual evolution, because we were shaped by sexual selection, which, by the way, is the operation of consciousness on the structures of matter at the most basic possible level. Well, it's a terrible rejection, but it's a salutary rejection. And that process of differentiated choice has shaped us into what we are. That action of consciousness, wanting the best from a potential partner, and selecting, at least in part, on that basis. And men participate in that too, in the Meistersinger manner. You know, men aren't competing for dominance with each other constantly in a zero-sum game to achieve sexual dominance. There's an element of that, right? Because some things are a zero-sum game, but men are perfectly capable and more than willing, in fact, to aggregate themselves into skilled groups and to celebrate the elevation of the most skilled above all else. And so we see this cooperative venture between men and women over the longest run of possible time in producing some refinement of the human spirit in embodied form. And we want that from everyone. We require that from everyone. We're thrilled to the core of our soul when we encounter it in a conversation or in a course or in a work of art that calls to us in that manner. We need to know this increasingly. We need to know all this consciously. You know, we've acted it out. We've produced images to represent it. It tugs at our heartstrings. It manifests itself in our dreams and our works of art, our literary works. It's all lurking there in some sense, and it's not the satanic power of corrupt oppression, not fundamentally. That's a far weaker force than that which can overcome it. And everything around us would be nothing but hell if that's all there was. And everything around us is not only hell. You know, for fragile and broken creatures, ignorant to the core, we don't do too badly. And people are capable of a nobility, especially under the duress of suffering, that's virtually miraculous when you encounter it. And it's so heartening to see that, and you've seen it in the people that you love when they're going through terrible trials. You know, people become corrupted and embittered by their catastrophes, and it's no wonder. But certainly in the main, that's not the fundamental human response. The fundamental human response is keep calm and carry on, you know, and good on you for that. And so, well, to sum up, let's say, we solve the power of perception with the divine word. That's how it is. And what does that mean? Well, it means truth. Every word a prayer, right? Every word a groping to find a firm foundation to stand on while you make your way through life. And every time you hear a conversation of that sort, or hear yourself participating in that prayerful process, orienting yourself to this highest uniting good and using that to govern your utterance, it's balm for the soul. Yeah, it's love that guides that, and love is the desire to work for the betterment of all things. And that's the proper orienting response, we could say. And it's truth nested inside of that. And that's how it is. And that's how it should be. And that's how it may forever be.